And good morning, Garden Oaks. So if I haven't had the chance to meet you before, my name is Rick. I serve as one of the pastors here, and most of my role keeps me behind the scenes, so I love it when there's an opportunity to walk through the scriptures together. So just honored for today. I got to find out, though, if we can relate. Have you ever gotten really anxious over a silly decision? Has anybody ever done that? Silly decision like you're in the grocery store. You're in the freezer aisle, you got both doors open, and now your heart is racing. You're starting to sweat because you don't know if you should get mint chocolate chip or Rocky Road. Okay, that's what I mean by a silly decision. Or how about this? You're at your computer or maybe on your phone, and you're ready to click that submit button, but you don't know if you should, and your palms are getting sweaty because you know the moment you buy those airline tickets, they're going to go on sale, right? You ever been there? This worry and stress and anxiety, whether it's over something silly or it's over something serious, it affects us, doesn't it? Like you feel your heart race. Your mind is going and you can't slow it down. You probably get a little snippy with the people around you, right? Okay, I feel very alone right now, right? Okay, thank you. Let me tell you a story. There's a time in my life when I was in my young 30s, so about 10 minutes ago. Not quite. But in young 30s, we had just bought our first home, so new homeowners. We had just had our second kid, Mackenzie. She was still a baby, and, surprisingly, having two kids is a lot harder than one. Who would have known? And there's my firstborn, taking offense to that. And I just got a new role at work. And it was a good role. It was a good thing, but there were some very difficult circumstances associated with it. And all of a sudden, I was stressed, and I was anxious, I was worried. I was trying to figure out homeowner, I was trying to figure out two kids, I was trying to figure out life in general, and now I'm trying to figure out this job, and the worry did something to me. I went for like a year with my chest was always tight. Stomach was just a mess. My mind would race at night, and it was hard to get to sleep. I would wake up in the middle of the night with panic attacks. Now, don't raise your hands, but I'm willing to bet some of you have been there before. Isn't it amazing how much worry and anxiety can affect our lives and affect our body? And I have to believe that is not how God intended for us to live. Like, I have to believe that there's a much better way to go about life. As we've walked through the Lord's Prayer, we've talked about several things, right? We've talked about God and the relationship He has with us. We've walked through His holiness. We've walked through His purposes and His kingdom. Today, we get to talk about what it means to ask God for our daily bread, what it means to ask Him for provision, what it means to ask Him to take those things that we carry that I believe we were never meant to carry so that we can let go of the weight and let go of the effects that they have on us. So here's the truth that I've learned, is that my worry and my anxiety, they come from this thing that I am grabbing onto something that I was never meant to grab onto. And that is to try and control the future. You ever done that? You ever okay, I'm going to make this happen. And all of a sudden, the stress, the worry, the anxiety comes up because you're doing what is not in your power to do. God controls the future. My role is to be obedient today to what He has called me to do. And then what we see in this scripture is to lean in and trust God each and every day for His provision. So as we walk through the Lord's Prayer, I want us to see that this teaches us to reverse kind of what we normally see in life. You see, in life, we start off very dependent, right? We doing okay? Okay. We start off dependent. You're a baby, right? And you depend on your parents for everything. And then you gain independence. In fact, we look at it as maturity in life, that we gain independence. I believe in the spiritual world, it is the opposite. We start off life independent from God, and that is not a good thing. And as we go through life and we go through maturity, we learn that dependency is what it takes as we go into spiritual maturity. We are all dependent on life, right? Even technology. So we walk through life, and here's what I believe about the spiritual life. We are growing in dependency. That is what we are meant to do. Let's look at the Lord's Prayer. As we walk through it, we started with our Father, right? It teaches us there's a relationship that God has with us, that we approach him as a loving Father, a Father who cares for us, who wants to see the best for us. And then we look at further in the Lord's Prayer, not only is it our Father, but our Father who is in heaven, hallowed or holy is his name. We learn that our God also has an authority. He is greater than us. And then we go from hallowed be your name to thy kingdom come. Your will be done. That may be one of the most challenging verses of the Lord's Prayer, right? Because we realize it is God's kingdom that takes priority. But then this next passage, and Lord, give us today our daily bread. This passage teaches me that I must acknowledge that I am dependent on God. Because when I live life independent and I try to do things apart from God, I take on all the pressure, I take up all the stress, and God invites us to give that to him. Let me illustrate it this way. In life, we are always gaining faith in somebody. So you think about the little decisions of life, right? As you go through life, maybe there's a little stress at work, there's something going on at home, or whatever it is. It's a small thing. You're like, I got this. I can handle this, right? And we do that all the time. And as we do that, what we're saying is, God, I got this. I don't need you here. I can handle this. And the truth is we can. There's a certain amount of things in life we can just handle apart from God. But I look at it like exercise. Anybody enjoy exercise, by the way? Okay, there's a few of you. I need to talk to you afterwards and find out how you do that. But exercise, you're going to the gym. You're putting strain on that muscle. You're developing strength in that muscle, not for the purpose of the exercise, but so that the strength is available when you need it. Think of our prayer life. If I am building the muscle of trusting in myself, if every day I'm looking to myself for the solutions and I'm not willing to trust God with that daily provision, what happens when there's something I can't take care of on my own? Have I built the muscle? Have I developed the discipline that I'm willing to trust God in the hard things? I believe that for us to mature in the spiritual life, we grow in dependence. Good way to look at this. I love like those homesteader shows, building off the grid. Anybody else watch those? Where like you have somebody, there's a few, I see a few hands. You have people that are going out in the wilderness, like they're like hours from civilization, and they're like, I own a couple rugged acres of land. I'm gonna build a house with my bare hands. I love it, because I really think I could do that. Like I am the type of person who believes I could live with nobody else around me. And there's a few thinking, no, you couldn't. And I'm like, I'll take that bet. But I also believe that God has called us to live in relationship with him and in relationship with one another. And the more I try to live independently, the more I actually deny what God has called me to do. God has called us to be dependent on him. So we look at prayer and I'm like, well, God, this seems petty. Like, should I really bother you with this thing? And God's like, yes, I'm asking you to come to me with your daily needs. Well, but God, what if you get annoyed with me? He won't. But God, what if it just feels weird? It feels like I need to talk to you all the time then. See, now we're catching on. That is what God desires. The Lord's Prayer is inviting us into a relationship with him. I love this quote. Religion is bread for daily use, not cake for special occasions. Have you ever treated prayer life like it was only for special occasions? Okay, I'm guilty of that one as well, right? I want to walk through a passage of scripture I think that illustrates this well. Back in the time of Israel, this is back in their history during the Exodus. Think Egypt, think the land of pharaohs, think the pyramids, okay? At this point in time, Israel lived as slaves in Egypt. They were actually helping build the pyramids. And through supernatural means, God frees them. And while they leave Egypt, we call it the Exodus, they had to cross the Sinai Peninsula. Now, even today, this is a vast desert. Barely anybody lives there. And so you can imagine in this day and age, when they're going through thousands of years ago, there's no water, there's no food, and the people of Israel had to cross this land. So I'm going to read to you a portion from the book of Exodus. And when the dew had gone up, and there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flaky-like thing, fine as frost on the ground, and the people of Israel saw it, and they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it, each one of you, as much as he can eat. And you shall take an omer according to the number of persons in your tent." And the people of Israel did so. And they gathered some more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, whoever gathered much had nothing left over. And whoever had gathered little had no lack. Each of them gathered as much as he could eat. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over till morning." But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it till morning, and the bread and the worm had worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning they gathered it, each as much as he could eat. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. Here's what's going on. The people of Israel are leading out through supernatural means, God freed them, but now they're in this desert and there's no food. And they're like, well, maybe we should go back to Egypt. Being a slave was better than being dead. And they're like grumbling and they're complaining, and there's this lack of trust and there's this lack of faith in God. So what God does is every morning they would wake up, there would be this substance over the ground, kind of like a flour. And they had to go collect it and use that to make bread. And God provided that for 40 years. He provided that every day as their daily bread. And there's something about this story that we learn, that God is our provision. He doesn't grow tired in providing for us. But what we also see is that God's provision also brings a responsibility on me. You see, as the Israelites woke up every day, they did not wake up with a hot, fresh loaf of bread in their oven. That would be amazing. But instead, they woke up every day and they had a responsibility. They had to go collect this manna. They had to go collect these materials. They had to work it. They had to knead the dough, and they had to bake it. When we say, God, give us our daily bread, there's a temptation I face to view God kind of like the genie. It's like, God, can you just put a steak on my plate every day of the week, right? That's my daily need. But that's not how often that's not how it works. What God is saying is, yes, I will provide. But that provision bears a responsibility in our life. That means we're working. We're doing our responsibility in life. It means that we're doing our best to eat healthy in Houston. Doing our best, right? It means we're living out the fruits of the Spirit. We're doing our best so that we're not causing relational harm. I have a responsibility in this as well. Does that responsibility negate what God is doing? Absolutely not. God's like, no, we are partnering together. I will provide. I'm going to bring those things that you need, but you have to take hold of those things as well. And we see that in the story with Israel. And the other part we talked about, it showed at the end of the verse. If somebody had, let's call it a bad day. Let's say they were a little tired that day and they wanted to sleep in the next day. Maybe there's just this momentary lapse of faith. And they said, hey, today I'm going to gather twice as much so I don't have to go out tomorrow. Maybe they didn't trust God. Maybe they made a mistake in their life. They're like, yeah, God may be mad at me tomorrow and he may not provide, so I'm going to collect double today. And the truth is, whenever they did that, whether it was out of greed, whether it was out of lack of trust, the resources that God provided didn't satisfy. They were rotten the next day. And that challenges me. Because how often is it I go to God and like, Lord, I need this. And he provides. And then the very next day, I'm like, well, I don't know that God's going to do that again. I better hoard something over here. I better put aside something over here because I don't know if God will do that again. But I go back to, where did we start with the prayer? Our Father. We trust him that he is one giving us good gifts. He is one who loves us. He's not playing a game with us. I can trust him each and every day. Now, I struggle a little bit. Anybody else a planner? Like, you like life in spreadsheets and calendars, right? Okay, there's a few of you. Yeah, that's me. And when I get to this prayer, I struggle. Because if God is going to be my daily bread, does that mean it is wrong to plan for the future? You know, is it wrong to have a 401k? Was Dave Ramsey wrong when he told me to have an emergency fund? I mean, certainly not. And I wrestle, what is the line between faith and making prudent decisions? And that's a tough one. I think that's something we wrestle with all through our life. But I don't think it's a lack of faith to make prudent decisions, to be wise in our decisions. But I will say this. Where is your hope? Because I go back to over here, and if it's all on me, if my hope is in myself, and I'm building this spiritual muscle of trusting in myself, I've got a problem, right? And if I go so far in this direction that I say, God's going to provide for everything, all I got to do is sit, pray, and everything's going to be fine. And while that sounds great, I think it negates a little bit of the responsibility he's given us. And so what I look at in life is, how do I live out this teaching to trust God for my daily bread? And I think it's, I put my hope in my God in all things. I can trust him for the future, but I think Scripture even tells us it's right to plan. Jesus gave this example. He was talking about what it means to trust in him, how when we put our faith in him, we should count the cost. And he gave this illustration. If you're going to build a building, you're going to cost out the building, or else you're going to get really embarrassed when you make it halfway through the building and you run out of funds and you have to stop. It's just a simple idea. You count the cost. And then I take that same principle and we apply it. King David, this is one of the greatest kings in Israel. He wanted to build a temple for God. And God said, you're not going to build it. It's going to be your son. And there were reasons why. But then David spent the rest of his life gathering together gold and silver and wood and stone, all the materials. Now, here's what David could have done. He could have said, God, this is a temple we want to build to you to honor you, and I believe it's in your will. So the day that I die and the day that Solomon takes over, can you have UPS drop a couple tons of building supplies on his doorstep? God is able, right? But instead, David knew the relationship with God. David knew that God was a loving God, that he cared for his people, and he wanted his people to feel close to him. David knew the power of God, that God was holy, that he ought to be worshiped. He was worthy of the worship, and having a temple there would have done that. And David knew the purposes of God, that there would be a light to all the nations by building that temple. David's work was in line with the first parts of the Lord's Prayer. And what he did, I believe, was make a prudent choice. Let me give you a silly example. You're learning a lot about me today. I love getting on YouTube and watching these prepper videos. I don't know if any of you have watched those, but these are people it seems like they're prepping for the end of society, and they have like 5 years of food storage and all these things. You know, if society crumbles, they think they're going to be just fine. Now, I watch them because, one, it's kind of fun to see what they're doing, and one, it's kind of ridiculous. But I'm going to be honest, and I'm not advocating for this. This is Rick, okay? This is just Rick. I've grown up my entire life in a hurricane zone, whether it's in New Orleans or here. Hurricanes are a fact of life. How many of you have ever gone through a hurricane? There's a couple of you, right? Okay, good. We all know what we're talking about. I know that when a hurricane comes through, it may be a little difficult. to get to groceries for about a week or two, right? Just things get a little difficult. It's not going to last forever. And I'm like, you know what? I have a responsibility in my life. I've got to take care of my family. And I'm going to, you know what? Yeah, I've gotten on this little thing. I want to have like a week or so's worth of shelf-stable food in my house. Now, if I were building that supply to say, you know what, God, I'm not worried about you. I can take care of this on my own. What happens in the future is on myself. It's all on me to provide for my family. And here's the truth. I would live with that weight. When I go to trust in myself, I carry the weight of the future. And if I'm putting a little bit on these people on YouTube that may not be fair, but if I were to say, hey, I got a 5-year food supply, I could ride out any disaster, then I've accepted that. And I'm going to bear the weight of that, and I'm going to bear the stress of that. But rather what I say is, hey, God has given me some resources. I can afford a little extra food, and I'm going to put that away to provide for my family. That is not to replace my trust in God. It is actually rather part of my faith in God, that I believe that He has provided so that I can fulfill the responsibility He's given. If a disaster strikes, I promise you, my hope is not in the can of Denny Moore stew that is sitting in my pantry. My hope is in my God. And it's a wrestle. I wrestle sometimes with, am I trusting God in my daily needs? Or am I leaning in on my own will too much? I'm going to be honest. I don't know that we truly solve that. I think there's a tension that we continue to work through. I think it's healthy that we continue to work through that tension. But here's kind of my litmus test. Do I hold it with open hands? Lord, in whatever I prepped, in whatever I planned, in whatever I hoped in the future, can I hold that with open hands to say, Lord, I will let it go because my trust and my hope is ultimately not in that thing, but it is in you. And that's part of what guides me through life. What I love about this prayer and this specific part of the prayer is that I believe when we say, God, give us our daily bread. You know, bread, we see it here in front of us, it is the most common food in the world. And it is not a luxury food. It is what we need for survive. It is a metaphor for survival. But to me, the most impactful word of this verse is daily. God says, come to me daily. Trust me daily. Pray to me daily. Bring your needs to me daily. Grow a life that is dependent on me. And as I look through, Lord, give us this day our daily bread. I look at it as a prayer of contentment. I know what it means to live a life that is not content. I know what it means to live a life that is always worried, always going after the next thing, right? Anybody ever feel some anxiety, a little fear of missing out, a little FOMO? Because I don't have this phone, I don't have this thing, I don't have this car, I don't have this job, I don't have this income. We fear those things. But when I trust God, when I'm dependent on my God, I learn how to be content. I'm not consumed with desires for what I do not have, but rather I live with an inner peace, trusting Him with my needs. I want to read a passage. This is out of Philippians. The Apostle Paul, we're probably about 30 years or so after the death of Jesus. And Paul has traveled the world. He has preached the gospel. And at this particular moment, he's actually in jail for doing that. And this is what he says. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication. With thanksgivings, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. You see, when we are willing to let go of the things that we were never meant to hold, I was never meant to try to control the future, to figure out all those things. I was meant to live in dependency upon my God. The truth is, I don't always control how God answers that prayer. I know how I want God to answer my prayers, right? But I trust in the relationship. I trust that he cares. I trust in his power, in his holiness, and he is separate. He is greater than me. I trust him. And I trust that his purposes, that his kingdom ways are greater than my ways. I trust him to answer my prayers appropriately. But even when my prayers are not answered the way I want, Paul says, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart and your mind. There is a freedom that is found just by bringing a request to God. There is an unloading as I carry this burden, I carry this weight, and I literally take and say, God, this is yours. You take this burden, and I trust you to solve it. I trust you to answer it. So it's kind of where we started. I live with anxiety because I'm trying to do what I know I can't do, and that's control the future. And what I think is so beautiful about the Lord's Prayer, and what is so beautiful about this passage of the Lord's Prayer, it invites us to deepen our relationship with God and to let go. I don't have to feel the anxiety. I don't have to feel the worry. But it is a daily practice of letting him. So what we want to do is we're going to close today with prayer. John's going to be up. We're going to have some other people up here. If you would like to receive prayer, and maybe it's about a relationship to Jesus, maybe you've never known how to trust him in this way, we'd love to pray with you, love to talk with you. Maybe there's something going on in life that there is a worry and there's a stressor, and trust me, those things are real. And this is part of what the body is for, that we can come together and we can pray for one another, and we can help one another with those burdens. Feel free, come forward in prayer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a passage. I want to read a passage out of the book of Proverbs to you. And then the band will play. And as soon as they start playing, if you would like to receive prayer, just please come forward. Proverbs 30 says, 2 things I ask of you, Lord. O Lord, do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me, and give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor